They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Mine wasn't. It was a disaster, a complete unraveling of everything I thought I knew. I met Elena 4 years ago in Chicago. She was radiant, sharp as a whip, and had this laugh that could light up the darkest room. From the moment I saw her, I was captivated. We had our share of arguments and rough patches, like any couple, but when I got down on one knee and proposed, I truly believed we'd weathered every storm. I couldn't have been more wrong. It all started a week before the wedding. I was at my best friend Ryan's apartment, unwinding after a long day. Ryan's the kind of guy who doesn't sugarcoat things, sometimes to a fault, but he's always had my back. We were sitting on his couch, beers in hand, when he hesitated mid-sentence. "Ethan," he said, his tone unusually serious, "there's something I think you should know." That phrase never leads to anything good. My stomach tightened as I set my beer down. "What's up?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "Are you sure about Elena, man?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Of course, I'm sure." "Why?" He sighed, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Look, don't shoot the messenger, but I saw Elena last Thursday at the Oak Lounge. She wasn't alone." I laughed, more out of disbelief than anything else. "Ryan, come on. She was probably just out with her friends." "Yeah, that's what I thought too," he said, his voice low, "until I saw her kissing some guy. And not like a friendly peck, Ethan. A full-on, can't keep their hands off each other kind of kiss." I didn't believe him. Not at first. I told myself Ryan must have been mistaken, that maybe it was someone who looked like Elena. But a gnawing feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, and I couldn't shake it. That night, as I lay in bed, Ryan's words played on a loop in my mind. She wasn't alone. Kissing some guy. A full-on, can't keep their hands off each other kind of kiss. It didn't make sense. Elena and I were happy, or at least I thought we were. But what if Ryan wasn't mistaken? What if the woman I was about to marry wasn't who I thought she was? The next morning, I started paying closer attention. Little things began to stand out. The way she kept her phone screen tilted away from me, the late-night texts she claimed were from work, the slight tension in her voice when I asked about her plans. At one point, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, but there was nothing. No incriminating texts, no calls from unknown numbers. It was all clean, too clean. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, the next time Elena said she was going out, I decided to follow her. For the next few days, she didn't go anywhere unusual. But 2 days before the wedding, Elena got dressed up more than usual. She wore a sleek black dress and heels, her makeup flawless as she twirled in front of the mirror, clearly pleased with her appearance. "I'm heading out with Mia and the girls," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "We're finalizing some last-minute wedding details and then grabbing dinner. I'll stay at Mia's tonight, okay?" "Sure," I muttered, though my mind was already elsewhere, racing with suspicion. As soon as she left, I grabbed my jacket and followed her. I trailed her car through the city, keeping a safe distance. She drove through downtown, weaving through streets until she pulled over in a quiet neighborhood. My heart pounded as I watched her step out of the car and stand by the curb, as if waiting for someone. Then he showed up. A tall man in a dark jacket approached her, his body language relaxed and confident. I didn't recognize him. He greeted her with a smile, and before I knew it, they were kissing, full-on, passionate, the kind of kiss that leaves no room for doubt. My stomach twisted, and my world seemed to collapse in that moment. Elena, the woman I was about to marry, was kissing someone else like it was nothing. I couldn't let it go unnoticed. My hands trembling, I reached for my phone and snapped a few photos. The flash was dim, hidden in the darkness of my car, but the images were clear. Her lips against his, her eyes closed in passion. I felt sick, but I kept snapping photos. Proof that I wasn't imagining this. They pulled apart, exchanged a few words, and got into her car. They drove off, and I immediately started my car again, tailing them. I followed them for miles, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief, until they finally pulled into the parking lot of a small, nondescript hotel. The building was quiet, tucked away on a side street. Nothing fancy, but certainly not a place you'd expect a couple to just hang out. They got out of the car, and I stayed hidden behind a row of vehicles, watching them walk toward the entrance. My stomach churned as I took out my phone again, snapping a few more pictures of them walking hand in hand, leaning into each other as if they were the only two people in the world. I couldn't just let it go. With my heart in my throat, I parked a little farther down and followed them into the hotel. At the front desk, the receptionist greeted me, and I took a deep breath before asking, "Can you tell me which room Elena Martinez is in?" The receptionist frowned, glancing down at his computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a reservation under that name." My stomach dropped, but I kept my composure. "I mean the woman who just walked in a couple of minutes ago with the guy. What room are they in?" The receptionist's eyes shifted nervously. "I'm afraid I can't give you that information, sir." I leaned forward, my voice lowering as I tried to stay calm. "Look, I'm about to marry that woman, and I just saw her walk in here with another man. I need to know what room they're in." The receptionist hesitated, his eyes darting around the lobby. I can't. It's against policy to give out guest information." I took a deep breath, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. Just tell me which room they're in. I need to know." The receptionist sighed, glancing over his shoulder before leaning in slightly. "Room 412. But please don't cause a scene." I nodded quickly, gave a tight smile, and walked away before he could change his mind. I made my way up to the 4th floor, my mind racing. I stood outside their door, my ear pressed against the wood. Muffled laughter and voices drifted through the walls. I could hear the man's low chuckle, Elena's voice chiming in softly. The sound twisted something deep inside me, but I stayed still, absorbing every moment. They were so at ease, as if I didn't exist. I couldn't just leave now. I needed to hear more, needed to know what was happening between them. I quickly glanced down the hall, then back to the door. Without thinking, I walked to the front desk and booked the room next to theirs, room 411. I couldn't stand the thought of just standing there outside their door, so close yet so far from the truth. When I returned, I slipped into the new room quietly. I leaned against the wall by the door, waiting for the sounds to continue. Through the thin walls, I could still hear the laughter, muffled but unmistakable. I held my breath, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. I didn't want to know this. I shouldn't even be here, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped out onto the balcony of room 411, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm raging inside me. The hotel was quiet, the city lights flickering in the distance, but all I could focus on was the faint sound of voices coming from the balcony next door. I crept along the edge, my heart pounding as I peered around the divider. There they were, Elena and the man, standing close, their bodies silhouetted against the dim lights spilling from their room. They were talking softly, their voices too low for me to make out the words, but the intimacy in their posture was unmistakable. My stomach churned as I watched them. Elena laughed, a sound I once loved, but now it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The man reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into his touch. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I started recording. The screen illuminated their figures, and I felt a sickening mix of anger and despair as I captured the moment. Elena, the woman I was supposed to marry in 2 days, was here with another man, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching. They stayed on the balcony for what felt like an eternity, their conversation drifting in and out of my awareness. Finally, they stepped back inside, and I heard the sliding door close behind them. I stood there for a moment, my legs shaking beneath me, trying to process what I had just witnessed. My mind raced, replaying the images over and over. Elena's laughter, the way she leaned into him, the ease with which she betrayed me. It was all too much. I slipped back into my room, my heart still pounding. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the footage on my phone. The proof was right there, undeniable and damning. But what was I supposed to do with it? The rational part of me knew I should confront her, call off the wedding, and walk away. But another part of me, a darker, angrier part, wanted to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. I wanted her to know what it was like to have your world shattered. I drove back to our apartment that night, the weight of what I had discovered pressing heavily on me. Elena was supposed to stay at Mia's place, but as I sat in the silence of our home, all I could think about was how to expose her. The anger inside me burned hotter with every passing minute, and the thought of her walking down the aisle in 2 days, pretending everything was perfect, made my blood boil. I needed a plan. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. I knew what I had to do. I spent the day preparing, making sure everything was in place. I reached out to a few close friends, asking them to be ready for what was coming. They didn't know the details, but they could tell from my tone that something was wrong. Elena came home that afternoon, her mood light and carefree as if nothing had happened. She chatted about the final wedding preparations, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I played along, nodding and smiling when necessary, but my mind was elsewhere. The day of the wedding arrived, and as the guests began to gather at the venue, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The room was beautifully decorated, filled with flowers and soft lighting, everything perfectly arranged for the happiest day of our lives. Elena was radiant, her smile dazzling as she mingled with the guests. She looked every bit the blushing bride, and for a moment I almost doubted myself. But then I remembered the footage on my phone, the proof of her betrayal, and my resolve hardened. As the guests settled into their seats, I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, cutting through the chatter. "Before we begin the ceremony, I'd like to share something with all of you." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I could feel the curiosity in the air, the anticipation of what was to come. I took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. "I know you've all been looking forward to the ceremony," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "But before we move on, I want to show you some of the best moments Elena and I have shared together. Our trips, our laughter, our love, all of it." A few people smiled, clearly thinking I was about to share something sweet and sentimental. The projector behind me flickered to life, and the first photos appeared on the screen. Elena and I smiling, hugging, laughing together on various trips. Pictures of what looked like a perfect couple. For a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of guilt. Almost. But then the photos changed. The next image appeared on the screen, and there she was, Elena, kissing another man. The room fell into stunned silence. Whispers began to ripple through the guests, people exchanging confused glances, unsure of what they were seeing. A few of them looked to Elena, their faces filled with shock. Elena's face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth as she gasped. Her eyes flickered between the screen and me, a look of pure panic flashing across her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then, without warning, the screen shifted again. The video began to play. Elena and the man in the hotel room, oblivious to my presence. The video showed them in bed, kissing, undressing. My stomach turned as the sounds of their intimacy filled the room, sounds I had never imagined I'd be hearing on the day I was supposed to be marrying her. The entire room went dead silent. Then gasps. The guests began whispering, some standing up in shock, others pointing, some too stunned to even speak. The atmosphere turned from confusion to anger. "What is this?" someone shouted. "Is this for real?" "This is insane," another voice rang out. Elena's face went white as she stood frozen, realizing what was happening. The color drained from her face, her hands trembling. The man she'd been with, the one I had never known, was nowhere to be found, but her betrayal was exposed for everyone to see. The truth hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating everyone in the room. "Ethan, what is this?" Elena finally stammered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" "You've been caught, Elena," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm done. The wedding's off. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I won't pretend anymore." She started to shake her head, but the damage had been done. The room erupted in arguments, people shouting at Elena, at me, some angry with her, others in disbelief. But all I could do was stand there feeling numb. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The truth was out, and now nothing would ever be the same. The room was in chaos. Guests were shouting, some crying, others storming out in disgust. Elena stood frozen at the front of the room, her hands trembling, her face pale as she stared at the screen. The video continued to play, a brutal reminder of her betrayal for everyone to see. "Ethan, please," she finally managed to say, her voice breaking. "Let me explain." I shook my head, my jaw clenched. "There's nothing to explain, Elena. I saw everything. I have proof. You've been lying to me this whole time." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I was ready to spend my life with, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone capable of deceit and betrayal. The guests began to leave, some casting pitying glances my way, others glaring at Elena. The room emptied quickly, the once beautiful venue now a hollow shell of what it was supposed to be. Elena's family tried to console her, but she pushed them away, her face a mask of shock and shame. I turned and walked out, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, and I needed air. I ended up at Ryan's apartment. He opened the door, took one look at me, and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't answer at first. I just walked in, sat down on his couch, and buried my face in my hands. Ryan sat across from me, waiting patiently for me to speak. Finally, I looked up. I called off the wedding. Ryan's eyes widened. "What? Why?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the footage. His expression shifted from confusion to anger as he watched. "I can't believe she did this," he said, his voice low. "I knew something was off, but damn, Ethan, I'm so sorry." I nodded, feeling numb. "Yeah, me too." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling over us. Ryan eventually broke the silence. "What are you going to do now?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. I need time to process everything." Ryan nodded. "You can stay here as long as you need. I've got your back, man." I managed a small smile. "Thanks, Ryan. I don't know what I'd do without you." Over the next few days, I tried to piece my life back together. I avoided social media, knowing it would be flooded with gossip about the wedding that never happened. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and family, but I ignored most of them. I wasn't ready to talk about it. Elena tried to reach out a few times, leaving voicemails and texts begging me to talk to her. I deleted them without listening or reading. There was nothing she could say that would change what had happened. I spent my days at Ryan's apartment, trying to distract myself with work and mindless TV shows. But no matter what I did, my thoughts always circled back to Elena. The betrayal stung more than I cared to admit, and the anger I felt was slowly giving way to a deep, aching sadness. One evening, Ryan came home with a six-pack of beer and a determined look on his face. "We're going out," he said, tossing me a beer. I raised an eyebrow. "Out where?" "Anywhere but here," he replied. "You've been cooped up in this apartment for days. You need to get out. Clear your head." I hesitated, but Ryan wasn't taking no for an answer. He dragged me to a local bar, where we sat at a corner table and talked about everything except Elena. For the first time in days, I felt a little bit like myself again. But as the night wore on, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to her. I found myself wondering what she was doing, if she was as miserable as I was. I hated that I still cared, even after everything she'd done. Ryan noticed the shift in my mood and clapped me on the shoulder. "You're going to get through this, Ethan," he said. "It's going to hurt for a while, but you'll come out stronger on the other side." I nodded, trying to believe him, but deep down I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. I couldn't keep hiding from the world. I needed to face what had happened and start moving forward. I packed up my things and thanked Ryan for letting me stay. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Home," I said. "I can't keep running from this. I need to deal with it." Ryan nodded, a look of pride in his eyes. "Good luck, man. Call me if you need anything." I drove back to my apartment, my heart heavy, but my resolve firm. When I walked through the door, the place felt different, emptier, colder. It was a stark reminder of the life I had lost. I spent the day cleaning and organizing, trying to reclaim the space as my own. As I sorted through my things, I came across a box of photos and mementos from my relationship with Elena. I hesitated, then opened it. There were pictures of us smiling, laughing, holding each other. Tickets from concerts we'd gone to, notes we'd written each other, little trinkets we'd picked up on trips. It was a collection of memories from a life that no longer existed. I sat there for a long time, flipping through the photos, remembering the good times. But with every smile, every happy moment, I was reminded of the betrayal that had shattered it all. Finally, I closed the box and put it away. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. It was time to let go. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to regain some semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, using the long hours as a distraction from the emptiness that had settled in my chest. My colleagues noticed the change in me. I was quieter, more focused, but also distant. I didn't talk about what had happened, and they didn't ask. Elena's attempts to contact me had stopped, and I was grateful for the silence. I wasn't ready to face her, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Ryan, you free tonight? Let's grab a drink." I hesitated, then replied, "Me sure." "Where?" "Ryan, the Oak Lounge." 8 p.m. I sighed. The Oak Lounge. The same place where Ryan had first seen Elena with that man. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, but I didn't have the energy to argue. When I arrived, Ryan was already there, sitting at the bar with a beer in hand. He waved me over, and I slid onto the stool next to him. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes searching. "Fine," I said, signaling the bartender for a drink. "Just keeping busy." Ryan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. "You know, it's okay to not be fine, right? What happened? It's a lot to process." I shrugged, taking a sip of my drink. "I'm dealing with it." Ryan studied me for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I'm not going to push you to talk if you're not ready. But just know that I'm here for you, okay? Whatever you need." I nodded, feeling a pang of gratitude. "Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it." We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the bar filling the space between us. Eventually, Ryan cleared his throat. "So, I've been thinking," he said, his tone lighter now. "You need a distraction, something to take your mind off everything." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" He grinned. "Remember that road trip we talked about in college? The one we never got around to?" I blinked, surprised. "You mean the one where we drive across the country with no plan and no destination?" "Exactly," Ryan said, his eyes lighting up. "Think about it, Ethan. No responsibilities, no drama, just the open road. It'll be good for you." I hesitated, the idea both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know, Ryan. That's a big commitment." "So was getting married," he said bluntly, then immediately winced. Too soon." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "Yeah, a little." Ryan grinned sheepishly. "Look, all I'm saying is that you need a change of scenery. And what better way to do that than a road trip? Come on, it'll be fun." I thought about it for a moment, the idea slowly taking root. A road trip. No plans, no expectations, just freedom. It sounded liberating. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." Ryan's face lit up. "Really? You're in?" I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah, I'm in." Over the next few days, we made plans, or rather, we decided not to make plans. We agreed to leave in a week, packing only the essentials and letting the road take us wherever it led. The night before we left, I found myself standing in front of the box of memories I had packed away. I hesitated, then opened it, pulling out a photo of Elena and me from our first vacation together. We were smiling, our arms around each other, the sunset casting a warm glow over us. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. But then I took a deep breath and put the photo back in the box. It was time to move on. The next morning, Ryan picked me up in his beat-up SUV, the back seat filled with snacks, camping gear, and a cooler of drinks. "Ready?" he asked, grinning as I climbed into the passenger seat. I nodded, feeling a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in months. "Ready." We hit the road, the city fading into the distance behind us. As we drove, the weight on my chest began to lift, replaced by a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I'd been missing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The open road stretched out before us, endless and full of possibilities. Ryan and I drove for hours, the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires on the pavement creating a soothing backdrop to our conversations. We talked about everything: work, old friends, our dreams for the future, but carefully avoided the topic of Elena. It was as if we had an unspoken agreement to leave the past behind, at least for now. Our first stop was a small town in the middle of nowhere, a place neither of us had ever heard of. We found a diner that looked like it had been frozen in time since the 1950s and decided to grab a bite to eat. The food was greasy and delicious, and the waitress, a woman in her 60s with a kind smile, called us honey and refilled our coffee cups without asking. As we ate, Ryan leaned back in his chair and looked around. I could get used to this," he said. "No deadlines, no emails, just good food and good company." I nodded, feeling a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah, it's nice." We spent the next few days exploring small towns, hiking through national parks, and camping under the stars. Each day brought new adventures and new perspectives. I found myself laughing more, the weight of the past slowly lifting with every mile we traveled. One evening, as we sat around a campfire in the middle of the desert, Ryan handed me a beer and leaned back in his chair. "So," he said, his tone casual but his eyes serious, "how are you really doing?" I hesitated, staring into the flames. "I'm better," I said finally. "I think I needed this. Needed to get away, to clear my head." Ryan nodded. "Good. I'm good." We sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound between us. Then Ryan spoke again. It's okay to still be hurt," he said. "What Elena did, it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a loss. You lost the future you thought you were going to have." I swallowed hard, his words hitting closer to home than I wanted to admit. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I guess I did." Ryan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But that doesn't mean you can't have a different future. A better one. You're a good guy, Ethan. You deserve to be happy." I looked at him, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Thanks, Ryan. That means a lot." He grinned, leaning back again. "Hey, that's what friends are for." The rest of the trip was a blur of laughter, adventure, and self-discovery. We met interesting people, saw breathtaking sights, and created memories that would last a lifetime. By the time we finally turned the car toward home, I felt like a different person, lighter, freer, and more hopeful. When we pulled into the city, the familiar skyline greeted us like an old friend. Ryan dropped me off at my apartment, promising to call soon. "Take care of yourself, man," he said as I grabbed my bag from the back seat. "You too," I replied, smiling. "And thanks for everything." He waved me off with a grin. "Anytime." I walked into my apartment, the space feeling different somehow. It was still the same place, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a fresh start. Over the next few weeks, I settled back into my routine, but with a new sense of purpose. I started going out with friends again, reconnecting with people I had drifted away from. I even went on a few dates, though I wasn't ready for anything serious. One evening, as I was cleaning out my closet, I came across the box of memories again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I carried it to the trash and dropped it in, feeling a sense of closure as I walked away. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. Epilogue. Months later, I found myself standing on a beach, the sun setting over the horizon. Ryan was next to me, a beer in hand, grinning like an idiot. "Told you this trip would be worth it," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. I laughed, shaking my head. Yeah, you were right." We had decided to take another road trip, this time to the coast. It was a celebration of sorts, a way to mark how far we'd come. As I watched the waves crash against the shore, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had learned to let go, to forgive, and to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly happy,